And today I wanted to talk a little bit about the Bach Partita in A minor for solo flute. And I want to talk about the last movement, the Bourree Anglaise. First of all, a bourrée is a dance form in French origin typically, which is in a quick double time and which has an emphasis on the upbeat or the anacrusis. And so in the Bach bourrée, we have that upbeat. That's ha ha, that's our upbeat. And that gives the liveliness and the forward motion to the quality of the bourrée. Now, this particular bourrée is a Bourree Anglaise, which means it's an English bourrée. So it's a little bit different from the French bourrée. The English bourrée is more of a heavy peasant dance. And I really like to keep that in mind as the character of the movement when I approach this piece, because you want to emphasize that the heaviness, you have the anacrusis, but at the same time you also have the heaviness of the downbeat. So there's a little bit of interplay between those two elements. Now there are some excellent videos that you can watch that talk about this particular movement, and I will put links to those videos on my website. Leonard Garrison has done teaching videos on this piece as well, so I'll try not to repeat what he says. But I also suggest that you watch a video that Emmanuel Pau made where he talks about his recording that he made of Bach sonatas. And it's an interesting recording. I think it's on YouTube under EMI Classics. And first of all, he discusses the Bach Partita as being written in much more of a style similar to when Bach writes for string instruments, and compares this to the cello suites and to the solo unaccompanied violin partita. And I happen to agree with him on that. I absolutely feel that idiomatically this piece lays and sounds so much like those string compositions by Bach. So frequently when I'm playing the different movements in the flute partita, I'm trying to imitate the sound of a cello or imitate the sound of a violin. But there's something else that Pau says in that interview which I thought was really interesting, and he says that his work in jazz informed his approach to playing Bach. And that's not something you hear too often. So I was listening to what he said about the idea of improvisation and how Baroque music relied on improvisation. And I really agree, and I think it's an interesting element that he points out there, that there's the improvisatory feeling in Baroque music, but there's also the freedom for the performer to add ornamentation. And that is the type of freedom that classical performers don't always feel comfortable in. So when you are looking at a piece like this Bourree Anglaise, try to challenge yourself to add some ornaments, whether they're trills or filling in some notes. Just for example, it's just a little example of how you can start to experiment, improvise if you will, on adding ornamentation to your Baroque music. Different flutists have very distinct and strong opinions on how to play Bach. There are those who want to recreate as much as possible the sound of the Baroque flute, the one-keyed wood instrument. And so whether they're playing on a Baroque flute or a modern flute, still try to imitate as much as possible the sound, the timbre, the techniques that were used in that time. And the result can be very, very beautiful and very haunting as well. Typically there's a more restrained use of vibrato in that type of a style of playing, and a different sense of timing in terms of how leaps are handled. And it might sound something along the lines of this. But what I really suggest you do is get some recordings of Baroque flutists playing this music so you can listen to what it truly sounds like on a one-key Baroque flute. Now there are other flutists who prefer to play it in what some might consider a more romantic style, or a more style contemporary with how music is played today, with a more liberal use of vibrato, and that might be something more like this. And of course there's everything in between, but one thing that is always true is that people have very strong opinions on how they want Bach played. And for that reason, it's often said that it's not really a wise choice to play Bach for a competition, because you never know who's going to be on the jury and what their individual tastes and preferences are in terms of how Bach music is played. But what I feel is that I enjoy Bach's music so much because of the richness that it has, and it lends itself to so many different varieties of interpretations. I never get bored of listening to Bach's music. So what you need to do is to find your own way to play it that is personal to your own style, and not try to force your own playing into any one category if that category does not feel natural to you. Now, I'm not saying that as a student you shouldn't seriously study the practices of the 18th century. You should, because that needs to be your starting point. But if you try to play Bach's music in order to please one particular person or another, it may just end up feeling tense and sounding tense.